Hi and welcome to Murdock's Music Minute, again with a ranking, but this time a bit different than my usual rankings because I'm not alone. Welcome Stefan Redelsteiner from Stefan Redelsteiner Experience.
Hello Murdock, nice to be here.
Not the first
Again.
time, that we are talking nonsense
about things that no one's interested in.
About music. You've got your own channel.
Yeah.
Would you like to briefly say what you're doing on your channel?
Yeah, I've got my own channel, Stefan Redelsteiner Experience, which is basically a channel about an old or older guy talking about music that older people are interested in. So basically the same as yours.
The same that I do.
Yeah.
Music that matters and or not.
That used to matter.
Yeah. And today we've chosen to do a discography ranking of a band that we've talked about before.
Yeah.
On both of our channels.
And in one of our last videos.
Right. So we're going to the lovely pastoral Sheffield. For
Have
this
you ever
one.
been to Sheffield?
Not yet.
That makes sense because I've met someone who was in Sheffield like a couple of weeks ago, and he didn't describe it as a pastoral town.
No, I don't think so.
It's one of the ugliest
it's
cities
industrial.
he's ever been to. Oh, that was a joke. Okay. Okay.
I guess it's an industrial city with, I don't know, steel industry and
I mean, I've seen
textile industry.
I've seen a movie, maybe you too, that takes place in Sheffield from the 90s, The Full Monty, the Robert Carlyle movie. And it's, also in the movie it's depicted quite depressingly. Yeah. But that doesn't mean, there will be nice places in Sheffield as well. In every place, in every town.
I'm sure about
that. I've been to Birmingham 1 month ago.
Yeah.
Also a town that doesn't have the biggest reputation, the best reputation, and it has some nice corners. So I think Sheffield also must have some nice places.
Everybody from Sheffield tell us about the secret places.
But I also have been to Manchester, and there's no nice place in Manchester. I've seen.
No, not a single one.
That was really terrible.
Okay.
Really terrible.
But 90s also is a good keyword, a good clue. So we're talking Pulp today.
Yes. Or how were they called? Abraxas Pulp or something was the first name of the group.
Yeah, in the very
or Arabicus
first
Pulp,
iteration.
Like
yeah. And we've given ourselves the assignment to rank their studio discography.
Just 8 albums.
Right.
I hope we haven't forgotten an album.
Yeah.
But it seems it's 8.
It's 8 albums. There were a few albums I had never heard before.
Me too.
Admit.
The first 2. I've never heard the first 2 albums before.
Yeah. I never heard the first 3 before doing this ranking. And I guess you are a bit more of a Pulp expert, or probably the more avid listener of Pulp. I mean, I like them, but I wouldn't consider myself a complete hardcore fan or somebody who knows everything.
Me too.
About this band.
Me too. I'm not a hardcore fan. Out of the big 4 Britpop bands of the 90s, they're my 4th favorite. It's always like a detector of someone who's a superficial pop fan. There's two ways to detect if someone's a superficial pop fan. When someone asks you, is John Lennon or Paul McCartney your favorite Beatle, and someone answers George Harrison is my favorite Beatle, that's always a sign of someone who wants to be clever but doesn't really know much about it. And the same is with, are you an Oasis fan or a Blur fan, and then the answer is Pulp. It's always people who never really listen to all the albums by those bands. It's a cool thing to say, or it used to be a cool thing to say, but it's really, it really doesn't have much substance, that statement, I think. I mean, it's subjective. You can be...
I think it was clever back in the day, but now it's a bit...
No, but the correct answer would be Suede.
Yeah.
If someone
and I'm
sure
somebody will comment again that Suede are the best anyways.
Yeah, but most people
you got this comment once, I think.
Yeah. And I can see it. I can see why someone says Suede is the best of the Britpop bands. But Pulp... I like Pulp, and I used to really love them, around the time, mid-90s, at the height of Britpop. Yeah. It seems like they are going to take over, like that they are the cleverest and the wittiest and have all those great hook lines, and Jarvis Cocker, this this unlikely superstar persona.
Yeah.
So everything was set.
They would have had the potential.
Yeah, they would have had the potential, but then then something went wrong in the late 90s, in my opinion, and they split up soon after that.
Right.
Yeah, but let's start with
the
ranking.
So, yeah, I mean, they've been around since the late 70s, which is always a surprise for people who don't know, or who only know the 90s hits from Pulp. Had a bit of a rough start. Huge breaks between the first 3 albums.
I think because they didn't make any money with it, and I think Chavez was first and foremost studying at the St. Martin's College of Art.
Also, the first label wasn't maybe the best one to promote this band.
Well, it always, the music has to be good. That's the first thing that has to. But I don't want to say too much now, because we should start with the ranking.
Yeah, let's start. So we are going in the classic way, from worst to best. So from rank 8 to our top spot, and let's find out whether we disagree very much or where we have maybe similarities in our rankings. And would you like to go first?
Yes. Number 8 is their debut album for me.
Okay.
And this is called It, isn't it?
Yes.
It is. Well, that's one of the 2 albums, like I said, the first 2 albums that I never listened to before, and the reason I never listened to before is I thought they would be exactly like they turned out to be. They didn't get good reviews. I mean, when they came out, they probably didn't get any reviews because the Pulp was so obscure back in the day. But even later in the Britpop days in the 90s, it was always like, the early albums aren't that good, so I wasn't really interested to go back. Now I did for the purpose of this video, and I'm glad I did, because now I can really talk about Pulp. Now I really know about everything they did, and what I suspected turned out true for me, at least. This is a bad album, make no mistake. This is a bad album. I think the only reason to enjoy this album or to recommend that album would be for someone who's such a big Pulp fan, who only knows like 3 or 4 albums, and he's so totally in love with the group. Then go back to those albums. Maybe there's something in there. Maybe some like roots to what later would blossom. But it's really, I think it's a very amateurish album. Yeah. It's the production is terrible. Chavez isn't yet, he was never a technically good singer. But he got better. Let's put it that way. That's really, I mean, he's like 20 years old. at the time,
very young.
And it sounds like he sounds like an 18-year-old kid from Sheffield who
first time in the recording studio.
First time recording studio. And the musicianship in general is also not that impressive to me. What surprised me is the sound. Not that I like the sound, but how they sounded, what they were going for. The mid-90s, that disco-y, roxy music-y, glam sounding thing, that's totally absent here.
Yeah.
And it's really more a rustic, a bucolic, it's like early 70s British folk in a way, like Fairport Convention or something like that. It's really flutes, lots of flutes, maybe even recorders. Don't know, lots of acoustic guitars, and there's definitely nothing to dance to on this album. And everything that Pulp fans later would associate with Pulp, that dark sexuality, but also that sense of humor isn't really yet developed.
It's not there,
because Chavez sounds and probably is a little kid. Sounds
he's
like a little kid,
different person,
with no life experience, which is obvious because he's so young. But that what later would become the strength of Pulp, that he's a person who, he became that great storyteller, and I think he became that great storyteller because he had something to tell. Like every one of us has something to tell when he goes through life. But this was at the beginning of his life, and there wasn't yet anything to tell or to imagine.
Or he hadn't tapped into this source of creativity of his. Or maybe it wasn't there.
And it's really, in my opinion, it's a poor record. It's a bad record. It's really a bad record, and I don't want to listen to it ever again.
Right.
So what's your number 8?
I was really curious going into this ranking because it gave me the opportunity to finally listen to those legendarily bad or supposedly terrible early albums by Pulp. And my number 8 is their 1987 release Freaks. It was their second album, on which they sort of tried to come across as this really absurd, slightly dark, kind of indie rock, almost with a little bit of a burlesque gothic touch. And Jarvis hasn't found his voice yet on this album. His singing is kind of wobbly. The music isn't half bad, actually. To be honest, there's one track I had to make a few notes. I Want You. This is an early highlight, I think, in the Pulp catalog. And for the first half of this record, I got the feeling, hey, this might be this kind of overlooked or maybe underestimated Pulp album. But then the second half of the album happened to my ears.
Yeah.
I have to say, Anorexic Beauty, for example, there's some really bad music on this album. And it's something that I think the band also isn't very happy about these days. I think it's almost embarrassing. Some stuff on this album, not good. In my opinion.
And it's my number 7, and I think it's only ever so slightly better than it. But also, it's a bad album. Everything you said, I agree with. Especially the second half, like you said, it starts promising. The first half of
okay. I even like the opening track, which is almost forced.
I wouldn't
weird,
say I like it, but it's okay. It's at least average music, I would say. I think the first half of the album is definitely better for me than anything on it.
Yeah.
But the second half, it's at the end of the album, it gets close to the level of me not liking it that it has. And I also think you're right. They're flirting with the trends of the time a bit on this album. The Smiths. I think there's a Smiths influence. And that's why I found it so interesting to now finally have listened to the whole catalog of Pulp, because now I can see where the influences of Jarvis are coming from more clearly, and things that I never really paid much attention to, like where does this storytelling kind of lyrical and the sense of humor and the darkness and the sexuality, where does this come from? And I detected on Freaks the first examples of him writing those kind of typical Jarvis, not as good, but it goes in that direction that we later would become to love. And I think it's from Morrissey's playbook. I think he must have been very influenced at the time. 1987, so probably written, recorded, maybe 1986. That was at the height of Smith's mania.
But it's not as morose as Morrissey. It's more not, like, hey, look, I'm going to tackle these dark topics, but with a more...
It is his own way of doing it. Jarvis would never sound like Morrissey, but the Smiths were at the height of their powers at that time when they wrote and recorded that album, and like you said, sound-wise, they really try to fit in with also Echo and the Bunnymen and all those bands of that era, and also Gothic, Cure. Yeah. This was also mid-80s, the first pop Cure albums happened around the time, and it's a bit like that, but not as good. And I think that was the interesting thing with Freaks, which is also not a good album in my opinion, but to see how the lyricist Jarvis Cocker and also the persona, the flamboyance, that's the Morrissey thing. I mean, it's not really that he's like copying Morrissey, but like he's listening to a Smiths album in the mid-80s and thinks, oh, that sounds, what this guy does is different. and I will also make it different. But I take this as a kind of a blueprint, as a platform, and from this base, I'm starting with my own ideas and my own themes and subjects, and that was interesting to me.
Yeah.
But it's not as good as Morrissey, and it's still, Jarvis is still trying to find his what his way will be. But his voice and his lyrics, it's starting to sound a bit more familiar than it was on it. And the music on the album, they get rid of all that folkiness. Maybe not all, but most of the folkiness from the first album. And now I understand why it isn't your eighth, because you like those kind of folky music. I think you will say that. I think you will have it as number 7, and you will say that you prefer it to Freaks because it has more of that acoustic charm. But I don't want to spoil your review, but I kind of liked it that they went more with jangly electric guitars and so on. I think that's interesting, but it's still not the Pulp of the 90s.
Miles away.
It's still not that in terms of quality and also stylistically. So in retrospect, all those critics, all the things I've always read and heard, that the first 2 or maybe 3 Pulp albums, aren't really all that good. Yeah, I have to agree.
Yeah. So you mentioned going with the trend of the times, and I might have a few maybe controversial or hot takes in my ranking, I'm not sure, but my number 7 indeed is 1992 Separations.
Oh.
Yeah. It's an interesting album, and as the title says, the album is really separated into 2 halves. The first half is actually a blueprint of everything that Pulp have become known for. I think Jarvis is coming into his own here as a singer, slowly but certainly. It's certainly more pop than the first 2 albums, and in the first half there are some really lovely tracks. Love is Blind is a competent start. And then in the second half, and I think I've read somewhere that this was also a bit of the influence of the new bassist they got. They try to do this kind of acid house or Manchester sound, which it's not bad what they do, but the songs are not very memorable.
And again, following the trends.
Yeah, and to me, this really harsh separation between the pop half and this acid house.
So was this style the reason for the album title? Did you look
I'm not sure. Okay. I'm not sure. Maybe they're playing with it. So while I wouldn't really say that the second half is bad, but it just wasn't memorable, and I don't see myself returning to this album.
But My Legendary Girlfriend is one of those from the second half.
Yeah. It's also
it's always known as the first big song.
Yeah, but it's also.
What's your opinion of that song?
I find it okay, but too long.
Me too.
So I wasn't really impressed with it. I like the first half, where they also start doing this slightly French pop influenced ballads a little bit. I like that a lot. So maybe that's why the second half really disappointed me, and that's why Separations, which actually was recorded already in the late 80s. It was only released a lot later.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
It's just my number 7.
My number 6 is Separations.
Yeah. Okay.
So the first 3 albums, in the chronological order, the first album is my number 8, the second album is my number 7, and the third album is my number 6. Separations, I think that's the positive. I have to say, there's always, they never, it never got worse. They developed, they progressed with each album, and with each album, they add another layer of what would become what we would know as Pulp in the mid-90s. And Separations is the biggest, in my opinion at least, the biggest step forward into this direction, because it's the first, at least if I listen correctly, but I think it's the first album really with those spoken word passages. That's also a trademark of Jarvis. Yeah. Like singing the choruses, but then there's also with this deep
his baritone,
voice, the sexy voice.
Yeah.
And on the first album, Jarvis as a sex symbol is completely absent. He's the most one of the most asexual performances on an album I've ever listened to. And now in Separations, he's the sex god, or in his own mind at least. He's the sex god, and that starts on this album, in my opinion. It's the first really album that's really obsessed with not just sex, but because I always thought Separations is actually really about a separation from, because also in the lyrics.
So I think it's
probably the title is about both. It's a
maybe
with both. Yeah. But it's really an album that's for the first time really obsessed with relationships and all that stuff.
The darker, kinkier sides of relationships as well.
And the other thing that's introduced on this album is those keyboard hooks that would become so important on His and Hers and Different Class, for example. It's the first time, and it really has this. In our last video, when we reviewed More Part, you said that the 90s Pulp had those cheap sounding 80s, 90s keyboards, and they start here.
They start there,
but the hooks aren't yet as good. The keyboard player, I forgot her name, she tries to play, she tries to come up with those great hook lines, but they're not yet really, those aren't hit songs, those aren't yet hit songs.
They're almost there.
Almost there.
So I
also in my notes I wrote down Separations is like an album. All those or most of those songs could be good B-sides for different class singles. It wouldn't be like, oh, that's totally different sounding. It's sound-wise it's there. It's not yet as good. That's the problem. But those would be nice B-sides to different class. And it's the first album that I think number 8 and 7 for me are really bad albums and albums I wouldn't really recommend to any casual listener. I wouldn't exactly recommend this album as well, because obviously there are 5 I prefer, but it's okay. It's not very good, but it's okay. It's enjoyable. I can listen. I listened to it now once or twice for the purpose of preparing for this video, and I listened like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, whenever, I think when Britpop was, I listened to this album for the first time, and I didn't really like it back then. But maybe now that I know that the albums before that are much worse, in my opinion, I kind of appreciate this album now as a first stepping stone.
In terms of sound and production, it's a huge step up from the first 2 albums, indeed.
And it's not it's now they are like professional musicians. They're sounding like real musicians on this album, and I can't say that about the first 2 albums.
I think Separations also was the album where their classic lineup had finally come together. I'm not sure, maybe also it was already on Freaks.
And My Legendary Girlfriend, I agree with you. I don't see it as the first big great Pulp song. I think we still have to wait for the first big Pulp song, or I would say the first big Pulp song was released before His and Hers as a standalone single. Rest My Case is to me the first really classic, but My Legendary Girlfriend, it's not.
I would
doesn't really do it for me.
If you've never heard it, I would recommend really to listen to I Want You from Freaks. It's a really, really good song, but it's not representative of all the rest on the album. Right, so let's move on. My number 6 finally then is It, the debut. So we more or less agree with the first 3 albums. It would be exaggerated or absurd to call it a good album. But what you called amateurish, I find there's something charming about this.
It's charming.
As you said, it's almost folky. There's a jingle jangle sound.
Like a hippie folk.
And a little bit like the Smiths, but actually I've checked it. I've double checked it. It came out before the Smiths, so the sound, this jingle jangle. Indie pop sound is already there. I actually also like some of the songs. My Lighthouse is quite nice.
That's the best song.
Blue Girls, even Love Love, which is a bit of a novelty song almost.
Yeah, My Lighthouse and Love Love, those are the two
But
songs.
I would agree that Jarvis is really almost a different person here. He hasn't figured out what he wants to do, and he sounds quite different. He's not a good singer on this album, but this, as mentioned, there's something breezy charming about it that I quite enjoyed. So that's why I put it above Separations.
My number 5 is, I don't know, maybe this is slightly controversial, but probably not. Number 5 is Wheel of Life, from I think 2001.
Yeah.
And that was the album. After that they split up for many years, for decades. It's not really, I was never really too fond of that album, because that was still in the time where I thought they were meant for really big things. They could become maybe not commercially, but artistically one of the biggest, most important bands of our time, so to speak. And this was really like, I can understand why they split up after that. That was really like, Different Class is such an iconic album, and this is hardcore for other reasons also. So this, I thought now when the next album, when they have 3 in a row that are like that in terms of quality, then they're really unstoppable. Yeah. But the whole thing collapsed. The whole thing collapsed, in my opinion. Yeah. The funny thing about Wheel of Life, now that I listen to it, is I think it harks a bit back to it. It's also it brings back the folkiness, the acoustic, and also the subjects. I think the whole disco thing, the whole glam thing, it's suddenly gone. Yeah. And they're back to, Travis is back to being, not being back to the guy he was in 1983, but it's still lots of kinkiness and so on this album. But it's more about, appreciating the simpler things of life. It's like the Suede album from around the same time, where they suddenly, after all those songs about cocaine and top models and ecstasy, hedonism, now it's like the Hangover, and it's like, oh, I just like to have a cup of tea on a Sunday morning, and life is good. And it's also called Wheel of Life. It's like, be happy with what you've got, and I don't really want to go to any parties and things like that. Yeah. Which can be great. You can make a great album with those subjects, but it sounds so lifeless to me. It's a bit it's Wheel of Life, but it sounds lifeless to me. I think it's more Jarvis wants to be the person. He wants to sell us this kind of character that he has now become, but he doesn't really fulfill it for me, in my opinion. With that album, it's like an act. It always sounds almost like a Madonna album when she says, "Oh, now I'm going to be a Buddhist," and next album, "Oh, now I'm trying Islam or something."
I'm still waiting for the Madonna album where she sings about gardening.
That would be a good idea for her. Maybe she's also like in a place in her career where she needs a fresh start, I would say. But I never really liked that album, although there are some songs on there. Yeah. There's single songs on that album that are amongst my favorite Pulp songs, and that can't be said about the previous 3 albums that I talked about. Yeah. This is the first album that really has highlights and really big Pulp songs, in my opinion. And also cool is that the album was produced by Scott Walker. Yeah. And it sounds like it's produced by Scott Walker. It's a weird sound. It's a weird album, and I appreciate that. So the 2 things that I like about this album is the weirdness and the uniqueness, and 3 or 4 songs on there that I really like. But there's also some real filler kind of songs to me. And one song, if you can call it song, but one piece of music or one track I really love about this album is Wicker Man, which is like a 10 minutes
spoken word,
very spooky, very unique. That's like the culmination of Travis Cocker, the spoken word artist. That's like the high water mark of this subgenre. And so it's a good album. The first 3 albums I wouldn't exactly call good albums, but this is the first time I would say my seal of appreciation. This is a good album, but it's not an excellent album.
Yeah. See. So my number 5, then this is where at the moment I would place the most recent album, More, which we reviewed, or actually did a first impression reaction to this album, and I've listened to it again and again since then. I really like most of the first half. There are some really brilliant tracks on that album. It's very elegant. You can hear it's a matured version, an older version of Pulp. It's also a bit more subdued, but they are still playing or they are returning to this disco and pop sounds. I don't want to go into the album at great lengths because we've done a whole video about it. I'm still a huge fan of the track Tina. But yeah, then in the second half, as I've already, I think, said also in the former video, the album loses me a bit. I've grown a bit softer on the ballads. I don't think that they're as bad as maybe I thought they were when I listened to them first. But it's a bit lackluster for me, so it's a good album. Number 5.
My number 4 is also a solid album, just a solid album. I think that's also a bit controversial, especially with real Pulp or 90s Britpop fans, His and Hers. I think many would say this is almost the masterpiece, or this is the predecessor to Different Class, and it's showing all the hints of what would happen. To me, it's a solid album, very good. Maybe it's a very good album, but I don't really have an emotional connection with it. For example, what's the song with the first time? Do you remember the first time? I didn't remember the first time. Do you remember the first time? I think it's a bit of an overrated. It's heralded as a big Pulp classic.
Yeah.
It's not one of my favorite 90s singles, but Pulp. I really love Babies. Babies is probably my top 10 all-time favorite Pulp songs. The rest of the album, it's good, but it's, I said that Separation sounds like B-sides for Different Class. His and Hers would be like better B-sides for Different Class. So this would be like, wow, great B-side, but not an A-side.
Okay.
So I like it. And it's the album where they finally, we always talk about the progression of the band. Now they finally got it. Not it, the first album, but they found...
They got over it. And
they found their DNA. In this album, they found their DNA. And that's great. But the album itself, it's not an album that I return to very often.
Well, bit of a surprise for me.
Yeah.
My number 4 is This Is Hardcore.
Oh God! Now you're I'm always afraid that I'm the controversial one.
I think now I'm getting into the territory where my ranking might be a bit weird for Pulp fans. This Is Hardcore from 1998, the great sort of calm down depression album. What can I say? Their guitarist left the band at that point. The former guitarist. In terms of sound or production, it's probably the best sounding Pulp album, maybe, at least for me. Also, at some points there actually is a bit of a more aggressive guitar sound, even though they lost their guitarist, who I don't know exactly why he wasn't happy with Help the Aged.
Really?
That's the official reason why he decided he wanted to leave Pulp. Though I would say Help the Aged is one of the highlights on this album.
I always thought it was a bit like, it's one of the highlights. I was at the time I read, but that was like gossip, and the time of NME and Melody Maker, so they always made up the stories, but it was really like, there were really serious arguments between him and Jarvis, and it was more like, who has more influence over the songwriting of not the lyrics, because that was Jarvis, but the music.
Maybe it was
a bit of that. But that could be totally wrong.
Yeah. So the highs are really high on this album. Party Hard, it's just great. The title track is wonderful with this sample that they used from I don't know, some German easy listening stuff. I think I'm a Man is almost a caricature of a Britpop song. I like it. The lyrics are fantastic. Dishes, for example, is a nice example of great Jarvis Cocker lyrics. But then there are other tracks that I don't find as memorable, or that maybe outstay their welcome a bit, are very long drawn.
Which ones, for example?
Seductive Barry. And
that's also like a spoken word.
I'm not the biggest fan of those long spoken words tracks where musically not a lot is said. Also, Sylvia could be a very good song, but then I think it's a bit too long. So I have a little bit of mixed feelings about this album, though overall it's really good, but yeah, it's my number 4.
This is the sound of someone losing the plot.
My number 3 is More Pulp.
Top 3, okay, wow.
The album we've talked about
Yeah.
like 3 weeks ago or something, and you also talked about it
Yeah.
now 10 minutes ago, so I keep it short. Everything I said during that first impression video is still true for me, because I re-listened to it in preparation for this video, and just watch the other video. Everything I said there, I still feel the same way. I think it's the production, the arrangements, the playing, everything that it is, which is so terrible on it, and that's so great about More. It's such a great production, and the arrangements are so tasteful, and the playing is so good. So maybe that aspect disguises the fact that maybe the songwriting isn't the best in Pulp's career. In some places there's like 2 or 3 real standout tracks, and I also think they picked the singles correctly. I think Spike Island and the the disco
Got
track.
to Get Love, or Got to Have Love.
Those are clear highlights, because it's always difficult to write those easy, happy-go-lucky, big anthem numbers, especially when you get older. But they have it.
Yeah.
We should stop saying it. But the third song that I really liked was the one where he's going to outer space. Was this Tina, or maybe the third track?
Grown Ups, I think.
Grown Ups. You didn't like Grown Ups too much, And also the Hymn of the North, and you also didn't like the Hymn of the North, but really some highlights for me. But maybe also some fillers. But the album as a whole, and that's why it's number 3. Here the part of the Psalms is to me better than the Psalm is better than the single parts. It's really a nice album experience, and it's, like I said in that video, I think it's a much better comeback than the Ballad of Dan was for Blur, which I found very boring. But this is an album I will return to, and I wouldn't have thought before I listened to More for the first time that this would end up a top 3 Pulp album for me. But it's only slightly better than His and Hers in my opinion. I was really, before I wrote down my ranking, it was like, is this number 3 or 4? But I decided to go with More.
Okay.
Number 3, More.
So my top 3, I was really going back and forth with those last 3 albums, where to put them, and maybe this is the point where we afterwards need to stop the video, I don't know. But my number 3 eventually is Different Class. I was surprised myself, but it's an excellent album. It's maybe it's also because I've listened to it so often, or so much. It's the more dramatic, more lusher continuation of His and Hers. It's maybe the most well-rounded album that Pulp did, and of course the singles. I think maybe the problem with this album is that still the singles overshadow most of the rest, even though
that was also your critique of
the
Morning
rest
Glory.
is
Morning Glory.
right. I mean, the other tracks on this album are great too, even though I have to admit there are a few that I'm not so big on.
Really?
But maybe I just talk about my highlights. So apart from the famous singles, Sorted for Ease and Wiz is excellent. I'm a fan of Underwear, the song.
Yeah, it's good.
But the slower ones, maybe I've listened to them too often, but they don't have the same effect anymore for me. So probably objectively speaking, it's a very good album. But it's just my number 3.
My number 2, and I'm really the orthodox one here. My ranking isn't really that special now that you shocked us all. I'm not going to shock you, because my number 2 is This Is Hardcore.
Okay.
So by now you know what my number 1 will be. This Is Hardcore, in my opinion, manages, if you're of the belief that Different Class is one of the best albums of the 90s, which you obviously are not. If you have to believe that Different Class is maybe the best album of the 90s, which I probably am, to come out with an album, with a next album after that doesn't repeat the formula, but still has all the good elements of what made different classes so great, but turn it upside down and make a dark version, like a negative, like a photograph, and this is the negative of it. First of all, that this is a bold move in a way.
Yeah.
But to pull it off, the quality of the songs and the album as a whole, as a piece of art, as almost like a concept. Like the concept is the hangover of Britpop in a way, and everything that was like a illusion, like something invented by the media, and that we all believed, but wanted to believe.
The treadmill of fame and
the cool Britannia and New Labour, and then the disappointment after you are disillusioned, or like when Chavez thought it's all bullshit, but still making such great anthemic music out of it, but with that negative twist. Like making songs almost as good as Common People and Disco 2000, but whereas those songs had this almost, in hindsight, naivete of we're gonna make it happen, and New Labour will be great and everything, and champagne, cocaine, and everything is great, party, and then flip it around and still make those great statements, those great choruses, great hook lines, but really like it was all a lie, and it's really pulling the curtains back, and it's also a hypnotic album in a way. I mean, Seductive Barry is one of those songs where you fall asleep probably, but to me it's like, wow, it's really his pulling
it
us
either creates
into
a vibe
his world.
or
it's like a headphone thing. It's like, wow, we're now in Chavez's head. What he sang about on different class, he was like singing about going into people's heads, and here he is in our heads, and it's really, like you said, some of his best, maybe his all-time best lyrics can be found on this album, and the song "This Is Hardcore," which is also sequenced perfectly in the middle, like a centerpiece, and before that, "Help the Aged," which is also a top 10 of all-time Pulp song.
It's wonderful.
It's so great, but also the not so big songs, the not like we make a big statement here songs, a song like A Little Soul, which is one of the most moving songs he ever wrote, I think. So it manages to sound big where it needs to sound big, but also those small moments really they move you. He has become a master, not of the bicycle, but he has become a master of his craft as an artist, as a songwriter, where he can pull off the big things without sounding like an idiot, like many Britpop bands, went into this trap of make everything bigger and bigger, and it became ridiculous at a point. Like those bands like Embrace or the post Britpop bands like Coldplay. But he also makes the small things, like a guitar, 3 chords on an acoustic guitar, A Little Soul, for example, or Sylvia. Maybe it goes on too long, but it doesn't really try to be a big thing, in my opinion. It's a like little vignette about something, and it also fits in perfectly on the album. And and like I said, it's almost a concept album in the sense that it's an different class, and this gets communicated with the first 2 or 3 tracks, which are the classic hangover tracks. The Fear, Vicious, which is more like the funny hangover track, and then Party Hard, which isn't really a favorite track of mine on that album, but it's also like that darkness that gets it's probably the only song on the album that has the disco vibe of different class, but you don't really want to dance to that song because it sounds dangerous, and you should not dance to this song. It's like a forbidden place where the song goes. So really, I've been talking very long about this album, but I had to try to bring justice to this album that you just made. So that was my little review of This Is Hardcore.
Right. My number 2, and this is really hardcore for Pulp fans. And
it can't get worse.
I was surprised myself because it's Wheel of Life. And I was...
You can't shock me any longer.
Yeah, going into this ranking, I was sure that, or I remembered this album as being a bit meh.
Yeah.
But re-listening to it, I was surprised how much I enjoy the songs. And you mentioned those vignettes on This Is Hardcore, and I think those vignettes work extremely well on Wheel of Life. you've mentioned it. There's more of a almost folk sound going through that album, or at least it's more guitars. It's almost more a kind of indie rock album instead of what you've come to expect from.
It sounds
from Pulp.
less technical, more humane.
More organic maybe. Scott Walker production. The album that also Pulp said they would never have finished if Scott Walker hadn't stepped in for the production. But I would argue that this is the great overlooked or underestimated Pulp album. I really like the songs on this one. Even Weeds 2, which is one of those spoken words things that I usually am not a big fan of.
Do you like Wicker Man?
Wicker Man is the one I don't like that much.
It's a seductive barrier feel.
But the night that Minnie Timberly died is actually quite also.
That's one of the songs.
One of the darker
song
ones.
At all.
Yeah. Okay. I like The Trees. I thought it was a fantastic single. I think it flopped when it came out.
It was really a single thing. It's a good song. I think, but is it really a radio song?
Yeah, with the string sample, I think it works very well. It's another, disillusioned album, but more laid back than This Is Hardcore. Yeah,
it's
maybe
softcore.
give it
Should
another
they call
chance.
This is softcore?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's softcore is more for me.
Yeah.
So of course, obviously, we know each other's number ones now.
I have forgotten what's left
You're
for
a different
you.
class, and my number one then is His and Hers.
Okay, a different class. What can I say about different class? I mean, I hinted at it. It's maybe the best album of the 90s in my opinion.
Yeah.
I once did a ranking, my 50 favorite albums from the 90s, and I think it was number 2 because I think they definitely maybe got to number 1.
Yeah.
But these things can change every day, so it's definitely in my top 5, probably top 3 albums of the 90s, and on some days it might be my very favorite album of the 90s. I think this is one of the rare occasions where I like every song, where I think every song is like a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a filler for me on that album. I have to think, maybe not even By Italia, but it works perfectly as a closer, so it's at the right place in that album. And it's everything I said about This Is Hardcore. Like I said, this is you can flip it now 180 degrees now, and where This Is Hardcore is going down, is pointing down, and then now you can flip it over.
This is the flamboyant.
It goes up, and it's
positive.
Flamboyant, hedonistic. Life is Great album, and it's filled with classics, but it also works as an album, and it's when I say it's one of my top 5 favorite albums of the 90s, that also means it's probably one of my not top 50, but it's certainly in my top 100 albums of all time, and only this and definitely maybe top 100 albums from me that come from the 90s.
Okay.
So, because like 90 albums are from the 70s, my top 100 albums. But it's wonderful. Yeah. It's a masterpiece.
I see where you're coming from, and I guess most would agree that Different Class is the best one.
And I think that's the last thing I'm going to say. I think from my 10 favorite Pulp songs, at least five are from Different Class. Yeah. Something Changed is probably my favorite Pulp song ever. And I like the hits, so often common people.
Yeah.
I'm easy to please with those kind of songs.
Unkaputtbar, how you would say in German.
But also Pencil Skirt, like album tracks that aren't supposed to be singles. A song like Pencil Skirt is so funny in a way.
Yeah.
It's a great album.
So I've chosen His and Hers, 1994, which is maybe not as elegant as Different Class, but a bit more even upbeat. The youthful version, or the adolescent version maybe of Different Class. I think it's an album that just plays wonderfully from start to finish. We've mentioned Babies. It's one of the best Pulp songs in my opinion. Lip Gloss is excellent. I am also a huge fan of Do You Remember the First Time? I think
I don't like the
it
chorus.
deserves its status.
I don't like the keyboards in the
Okay.
chorus.
Yeah, yeah.
It's too.
And then the closing track, what's the title again? David's Last Summer, which is one of those long narrative ones, but even that one, I think, really brings across the feeling of living in the 90s, of being an adolescent or in your early 20s or something. So that for me even more epitomizes that 90s feeling than maybe Different Class.
I think His and Hers has all the potential, but Different Class is the explosion. Right? In my opinion, it's where everything comes to fruition, where everything that they already tried on His and Hers is now perfected. But
Yeah. Maybe it's a bit too perfect for me. I don't know.
I could see that. You know, I understand people who make such choices like you and then say Different Class is only, what is it, the fourth best album?
Third.
I can understand it when you say it's too perfect. Then I understand it.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's what was our discussion of all the Pulp albums. Let us know your rankings, maybe.
All in all, I think they're maybe a bit overrated by Pulp fans themselves, but still a great band, and probably my top 10 favorite bands from the 90s.
Okay. Probably wouldn't make my top 10, but I have a lot of respect for Pulp, and they definitely deserve their place in pop history, especially 90s pop history.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for watching. Tune
you.
in again for another Murdock Music Minute, and maybe jump over to Stefan's channel.
If you want.
Bye bye.